And countless other nations charge us tremendously higher
So,
tariffs.
Donald Trump's tariff onslaught is finally upon India too.
India charges us auto tariffs higher than 100%. April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs kick in. And whatever they tariff us, other countries, we will tariff them. That's reciprocal, back and forth. Whatever they tax us.
In the first part of this episode, noted economist Nilanjan Banik told me why he thinks Trump's tariffs on India, or his idea of tariffs overall, protecting America's domestic industry and cutting its trade deficits, is incorrect.
Anyone will tell you that imposing tariff does not make much sense. Mr. Trump keeps on saying that he's going to make the America great again, but on the contrary, just the opposite is going to happen.
In this part of the episode, I speak to ET's executive editor Politics, Pranab Dhal Samanta, on the geopolitical aspect of it. Pranab makes a counterpoint and tells me that it is actually in India's best interests to strike a deal with the US. Listen on, it's Friday, the 7th of March. I'm your host Anirban Chowdhury, and this is the Morning Brief. Hi Pranab, very warm welcome to the Morning Brief once again. Always good to have you.
Thank you for having me on the Morning Brief once again. It is always a pleasure speaking here.
So, quite a geopolitical storm brewing, right? I mean, I shall actually start by asking you the same question that I asked the economist gentleman who was the guest in the previous part of this episode. Did this come as a surprise?
No, absolutely not, because it was very clear. Look, this is a domestic political agenda on which Trump has won the election. Tariffs and immigration are two issues on which India will have to do business with Trump. Trump will pressurize on both these fronts, and he did on immigration already by sending those reporting illegal immigrants. And trade, he will definitely slap you with tariffs. And frankly, everybody was aware of this. That's why the Prime Minister, when he went to the US in February, the talk of a bilateral trade deal found mention in the joint statement. Simultaneously, the Trump administration had already started the process through the USTR, the US trade representative, to work out sort of the details of tariffs from all countries, especially India, put in place a reciprocal tariff plan by April 1st. Now he's put it as April 2.
But, Trump, if you just listen to Trump's speech, he's saying that these are countries that have always taken unfair advantage of the US. This blaming the country and saying it of India as well, which has always been sort of a US ally, especially against China. Putting it on the same list as China and making it the target of this whole tariff game. Isn't that a setback?
No, actually not. You see, you must understand what is happening is that he is taking on the WTO system. Okay. And the point is, India will have to also reassess its position as to how compliant it needs to be to WTO. Let me explain this to you. Trump mentioned automobiles, right? 100% duty, close to 100% duty. He mentioned that as an example. Now, what happens is India has no threat from US auto industry,
correct,
per se, but it has threat from the Chinese, right? So it imposes high tariffs to actually target the Chinese from entering into the Indian economy and sort of selling their vehicles, and that will hurt Indian domestic auto industry. But according to WTO, the MFN principle, the 100% will have to be applied to every other trading partner.
Correct. No differential tariff.
You cannot do any difference, right? Now, here is what we have to think geopolitically. That is it fair that the same 100% is being applied to the US. From our perspective, I don't think there is any need for us to impose 100% to the US. Now, can we politically take a call to put the MFN principle at risk and prioritize the relationship with the US? That's the question Trump is asking you. If you are able to, if you're able to abandon or at least be light on the MFN principle and do a deal with the US, that's the signaling the US wants. In 2019, US and Japan did a similar deal. It was criticized by the world as being against WTO principles. But no one actually carried a complaint to the WTO because nobody wants to complain against the US. So that's a political question that nobody will ever complain against Trump to the WTO. So why are we holding on to the MFN principle? So this is the tricky question, because otherwise there are lots of items on which we have high tariffs with the US, which we can actually do away with because they're not targeted at the US.
So do you see Trump pulling out of WTO then?
I don't think he cares.
Yeah, correct.
As long as if the WTO set up, that somebody files a complaint and WTO suddenly starts acting tough with the US, then we can see. I mean, that you cross the bridge when you get to it. But what he has used now, the question to ask is, how is US as a principal WTO member, how is the president actually going against an international agreement which his government, maybe not his government, but the US government has signed? He's doing it by invoking certain emergency powers. He has invoked an economic emergency act of some sort, and which allows him to take these decisions. This can be challenged domestically in the Congress, and the Congress is now in his control. So if you were to ask my assessment, he is trying to attain maximum domestic political mileage, achieve all of this before the next congressional elections, because now he has majority in Congress, and such difficult questions of why this act is being invoked, why is it in play for so long, these kind of questions will be more difficult to answer if it was not a Republican majority Congress. So he has these 18-20 months, and he will try to do maximum in the first 18-20 months. Earlier thinking was that if we can tide over those 18-20 months, but clearly he will not allow you that space. The whole naming and shaming at times of countries is aimed at pressurizing them so that they don't act now, rather than them trying to tide over or say, oh, this will blow over. He wants the first 20 months to count.
Okay, so what do you think India can and should do?
The question is, how fast can we strike that trade deal? The earlier deadline set in the February joint statement is September. I think the April sort of date means that, we'll have to work out that trade deal sooner than we had actually planned, number one. Number two, we need to, Commerce Minister is already there in the US. We need to take some very important political calls internally. And number three, if we can use our diplomacy with the US to at least hold off till the trade deal is done. For that, we'll have to show some intent from our side, and maybe they'll hold off for a bit. So I think everything now revolves around how we get that trade deal.
What kind of trade deal are we talking about? Are you talking about a free trade agreement outside the confines or contours of the WTO?
There is an FTA which you have within the confines of WTO, all right? Which the WTO allows, which has a certain definition to it, that if trading partners agree to a substantial lowering of tariffs on substantial number of trading goods, they've never defined what is substantial, then you can have a separate FTA. Like EU is one, a lot of countries have done FTAs.
Correct.
But with America, we may not be able to do such a deal because Trump is very clear of what he means by making America, and he wants to put up walls as well. So you will have to look at a trade deal outside the WTO confines.
Pranab, finally, how do you see the next 2-3 months panning out, especially for India?
I think a trade deal with the US is to our advantage, number one. Number two, we are genuinely a high tariff country, Anirban. We are. I mean, forget what Trump is saying. We have a very tariff based approach to trade, which is not the right thing. We should have a standards based approach to trade, and this debate has been going on for a long time. But unfortunately, reforms, while they have happened in the financial sector, reforms in the trading sector has not happened. So we should use this opportunity to actually make those reforms, and doing a trade deal with the US is a good way to start it. The moment we do a trade deal with the US, if that works out, the political signaling it does to, say, the EU and other big trading entities is that, okay, it is good to now do a deal with India because India has a deal with the US. So I think the positive spin-offs on, say, India-UK trade deal or a India-EU trade deal, I think the positive spin-offs on them will be also good. So I don't see this as, in any way weakening us or will have some kind of impact. In fact, we should move closer to the Western ecosystem, because the problem on the Chinese side is China is dumping big time. All right. So it's better to ally here, work this set out, and then deal with the Chinese dumping problem, because I think when you deal with that, you might find a more helpful Trump. And the other point which is important is solving the trade issue. At the same time, there is a whole lot of strategic issues, right? The tech partnership, the defense partnership, a lot of all that, which is actually at the core of the US-India relationship. That should not get impacted. Like the Quad, the ISET, what the previous government called the ISET, they are now calling it the Compact, the nuclear stuff, the space stuff, the defense stuff, which is where the real engagement happening. I think that should be sort of preserved, and not let this trade and tariff and immigration should not be allowed to, affect this space, the core space.
Pranab, thank you so much for your insights.
No problem. Anytime. Thank you.
That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief. It was produced by me and sound designed by Amrit Reggie. A new episode of The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday and Friday on an audio streaming platform of your choice. Keep listening. All clips used in this episode belong to their owners. Credits are mentioned in the description.